Welcome to Finding Home Again, a story of second chances, family, and discovering true purpose. Ethan, a successful but lonely businessman, returns to his hometown, reconnecting with his estranged sister, Grace, and her daughter, Mia. He's soon drawn to the community center they hold dear, where his heart and priorities begin to change. But will his efforts to heal past wounds and become part of their lives be enough? And as his bond with Julia, the center's director, deepens, can he commit to a life driven by love and legacy rather than ambition? If stories of redemption and new beginnings inspire you, hit subscribe for more heartwarming content. And leave a comment below. What would you do with a second chance? Now let's dive in. The first rays of sunlight crept through the silk curtains in Ethan Collins' expansive bedroom, casting a soft, golden glow across the perfectly organized space. As he opened his eyes, he took in the serene light and listened to the silence around him. Sunday mornings were his favorite. No early meetings, no frantic phone calls or bustling offices. Just him, his thoughts, and his home. Except the word home felt strange to Ethan now. This mansion, with its pristine white walls, towering windows, and decor that seemed straight out of a luxury magazine, was certainly his house. But whether it was his home was another matter entirely. It was a fortress of glass and stone, 20 rooms, an Olympic-sized pool, and a meticulously curated garden. And yet, despite the grand design, it often felt empty. The stillness in the air didn't bring comfort or peace. It merely reminded him of the silence that had become his only constant companion. Ethan Collins had built an empire. At 45, he was the CEO and founder of Coltech, one of the leading tech companies in the country. He'd worked day and night, sacrificing holidays, weekends, even his own health to reach the pinnacle of his industry. Every step of the way, he'd pushed himself to be more ambitious, more driven, more focused. Success had come with a high price, but it had come, and he was one of the wealthiest men in the state because of it. However, as he lay in his silk-sheeted bed on that quiet Sunday, a hollow ache filled him. The numbers in his bank account and the properties under his name did little to fill the growing emptiness. Ethan thought back to the people he'd left behind on this climb to the top, friends who drifted away when he couldn't find time for them, relationships that faltered because he was too focused on work, and, most painfully, family. He had only one close family member left in the world, his younger sister, Grace. The last time they'd spoken was almost a decade ago, at their parents' funeral. Ethan had stayed just long enough to make his apologies and fulfill the formalities before returning to the relentless demands of his business. Grace, he recalled, had been devastated. They had been closing as children, inseparable even. But his commitment to his career had driven a wedge between them that only grew as time passed. His visits became fewer and farther between, and he stopped returning her calls, too focused on expanding his empire. Ethan shook off the memories and slid out of bed, grabbing his running gear. Sundays, especially quiet mornings like this, had become his ritual for reflection. As he dressed, he caught sight of himself in the mirror. He looked every bit the successful entrepreneur. Tall, fit, well-groomed, and dressed in high-end athletic wear. But as he studied his reflection, he noticed the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. Lines that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the weight of choices and sacrifices he'd made. Dressed and ready, Ethan left his bedroom, walking down the long hallway that echoed with each step. He passed by rooms he rarely used. The guest suite, a theater room, a library filled with books he hadn't touched, a gym with state-of-the-art equipment that he barely used. He paused at the entrance to the library, considering the rows of books. He'd once been an avid reader, especially as a kid, always with his nose in a new novel or mystery. His parents had always encouraged him, and Grace had often teased him for it, calling him a bookworm. Now, though, the library was merely decorative, another piece of his carefully constructed image, rather than a sanctuary of knowledge. Ethan closed the door to the library and headed outside. The fresh morning air was a sharp contrast to the climate-controlled silence of his house. The neighborhood of Willow Heights was as exclusive as it was pristine, with immaculate lawns, tree-lined streets, and houses that were as grand as his own. Ethan began to jog, letting his legs carry him through the winding roads. As he jogged, he noticed only a few people around: a gardener clipping hedges, a couple walking their dog, and a paperboy making his rounds. These were the only hints of life in a neighborhood like this, where houses were filled with the wealthiest residents in the city, but often devoid of the warmth of everyday life. Ethan took his time, running without a fixed path, letting the rhythm of his steps distract him from the ache in his chest. He tried to focus on anything but the emptiness that gnawed at him. But as he passed familiar streets, his mind drifted to the past. Memories of his childhood flooded in. Summers spent playing in the backyard with Grace. Their games of make-believe that turned their modest family home into a castle, a pirate ship, or whatever their imaginations desired. He could hear her laughter, see her wide-eyed wonder, feel the closeness they once shared. They had been each other's whole world once. But now he barely knew where she lived. Where had everything gone wrong, he wondered. He'd achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of. Yet in reaching the top, he felt lonelier than ever. As he rounded a corner into an unfamiliar street, something snapped him out of his thoughts. A small voice calling out, "Hey, I know you!" Ethan stopped abruptly, catching his breath. He turned, scanning for the source of the voice. Across the street, a little girl with untidy brown hair tied in 2 braids was waving at him enthusiastically. She looked about 7 or 8 years old, her clothes simple and slightly worn, a clear sign that her family probably didn't share the same wealth as the residents of Willow Heights. He watched, somewhat puzzled, as the girl ran up to him, her eyes wide with curiosity and excitement. "Are you Uncle Ethan?" she asked, grinning as if meeting a celebrity. Ethan's mind raced. "Uncle?" His heart pounded with a mixture of confusion and recognition. He knelt down to her level, managing a gentle smile. "Well, that depends," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl's face lit up even more. "I'm Mia. My mom showed me your picture once. She has it in her wallet," she added matter-of-factly. Her tone was innocent, completely devoid of the resentment or hesitation he expected after so many years apart from his sister. The mention of the picture stunned him. Grace had kept his photo all these years? Despite everything, she had somehow still included him in her life, even if only through a photograph for her daughter. His heart clenched, a strange combination of guilt and longing surging within him. He wanted to know more about this little girl, his niece, his family, he realized with a jolt. "What does your mom look like?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Where is she now?" Mia, unfazed by his growing curiosity, pointed down the street. "She's at home. We can go there if you want," she said, reaching out her small hand toward him. For a moment Ethan hesitated. A part of him knew he should probably leave, that it might be easier to turn away rather than confront the family he'd neglected. But the sight of Mia's innocent face, filled with nothing but hope and excitement, was enough to shatter his doubts. "Okay," he said softly, taking her hand. "Lead the way, Mia." They walked together, her small hand gripping his as they left the manicured streets of Willow Heights and entered a more modest neighborhood. The sprawling mansions and luxury cars gradually gave way to simpler homes, apartments with flower pots in the windows, and families sitting on their front steps. Ethan felt an unfamiliar warmth in this place. There was life here, people greeting one another, children playing outside, laughter echoing through the open windows. It was so different from the isolation he felt in his mansion. Finally, they reached a small, well-kept house with a worn porch and potted plants decorating the steps. Mia let go of his hand and skipped up to the front door, knocking confidently. The door creaked open, revealing a woman with tired eyes and an unshaven beard. For a brief moment, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was her. It was Grace. Despite the years that had passed, he recognized her instantly. Her sharp jawline, her deep-set eyes that were once filled with light, but now held a faint shadow of exhaustion. They stared at each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Ethan could see the surprise, the anger, and something softer, maybe even relief, in her eyes. But before he could say anything, Mia piped up, her innocent voice breaking the silence. "Mom, it's him! It's Uncle Ethan!" Grace's gaze shifted to Mia, and her face softened as she looked at her daughter. She took a deep breath, then met Ethan's eyes, her expression guarded but welcoming. "It's been a long time," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. Ethan nodded, at a loss for words. He wanted to say so much, to apologize, to explain himself, but he could only manage a quiet, "Yes, too long." She hesitated, then stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in," she said simply. As he stepped inside, Ethan felt a flood of emotions wash over him. Regret, hope, and a longing to bridge the years of silence and distance. This house, though modest, felt warm, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the soft hum of music from a small radio in the corner. He looked around, taking in the family photos on the walls, the drawings Mia had proudly displayed, and the worn but cozy furniture that held a lifetime of memories he'd missed. And in that moment, Ethan knew that this visit was only the beginning. He had taken his first step toward a path he had once abandoned, a path back to his family. The journey ahead would not be easy, but he was determined to try, if Grace would let him. Ethan Collins felt a blend of nervousness and relief as he stepped inside Grace's small but cozy home. The scent of something faintly floral and warm, like lavender and baked bread, filled the air. This house was modest, with worn-out furniture and faded wallpaper, but it was alive, filled with signs of love and family. Drawings, most likely Mia's, decorated the walls. Little details stood out. A slightly chipped mug by the sink, a collection of picture frames showcasing family photos, and a small table crowded with Mia's schoolwork and crayons. Everything here told a story. "Sit down if you like," Grace said, her tone still guarded. She gestured to the couch, and Ethan, unsure of where to start or what to say, took a seat. As he settled in, Mia sat next to him, beaming up at her uncle with unfiltered curiosity. "Uncle Ethan," Mia began, "Mom said you were really busy. Is that why we've never met?" Ethan felt his chest tighten. He looked at Grace, searching for a hint of her reaction, but her face was unreadable. He smiled at Mia, trying to keep his voice light. "Yes, Mia, I was very busy for a long time. But I've missed a lot, haven't I?" Mia nodded eagerly, seemingly unaware of the tension simmering between the adults in the room. "Mom said you're super smart and that you build things on computers. Are you a spy?" Ethan laughed despite himself, grateful for the innocence and warmth in Mia's question. "No, not a spy," he replied with a chuckle. "Just someone who loves to solve problems." Grace busied herself in the kitchen, preparing tea and watching them from a distance. Ethan noticed her glancing over every so often, her expression softening when she looked at Mia. Finally, she walked over, placing a cup of tea on the small coffee table in front of Ethan. "So," she said, sitting down across from him, "how's life in Willow Heights? Must be a big change from here." Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to respond. The truth was, he felt a growing sense of discomfort with the question, because life in Willow Heights was a stark contrast to what he was seeing here, and he was starting to wonder if he'd chosen the wrong things to prioritize. "It's quiet," he said finally, searching for the right words. "Big but lonely sometimes." Grace raised an eyebrow, her expression tinged with skepticism. "Lonely? I would think that's the one thing you wouldn't have to worry about. You've got everything a person could want." Ethan sighed, realizing how little Grace truly knew about the life he'd built, and how empty it felt in ways he was only beginning to understand. "It's complicated," he admitted, feeling more vulnerable than he had in years. "All the success. It's not quite what I thought it would be." Grace looked at him for a moment, her gaze softening just a bit. "I guess things aren't always what they seem," she said quietly. After a few moments of silence, Mia tugged on Ethan's arm. "Uncle Ethan, do you want to see my room?" Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and her energy was contagious. Ethan glanced at Grace, who nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Sure, Mia," he said, rising from the couch. "Lead the way." Mia guided him through the house, chattering non-stop about her favorite toys, her best friend from school, and her pet fish, Sparkle. When they reached her room, Ethan was struck by the contrast to the pristine, impersonal spaces in his mansion. Mia's room was a world of color, with drawings taped on the walls, shelves crammed with stuffed animals, and books scattered across her small bed. "This is Sparkle," Mia exclaimed, pointing proudly at a small fishbowl on her dresser, where a goldfish swam lazily. "Mom got him for me last Christmas." Ethan crouched down, looking at the fish, then back at Mia. "He's a lucky fish," he said with a smile. "He's got a great home here." Mia beamed at him, clearly pleased. "Do you have pets, Uncle Ethan?" Ethan hesitated. The truth was he didn't. He barely spent time at his own house, let alone with a pet. "No, I don't have any pets," he said, feeling a strange pang of guilt. "I guess I never thought to get one." Mia looked at him with a mix of surprise and sympathy. "You should get a dog. They're really good at keeping people company." Ethan laughed, marveling at her simplicity and insight. For a moment he envied her clear, innocent perspective, free from the complications of adulthood. As he looked around the room again, he felt a strange warmth. This was what a home should feel like, a place filled with memories, warmth, and love. When they returned to the living room, Grace was waiting, and there was a visible relaxation in her posture, as if the edges of her defenses had softened. "It's nice to see her so excited," Grace said, her voice quiet but sincere. "She doesn't have many family members to talk to." Ethan swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. "I'm sorry, Grace," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For everything. For not being there. For thinking that success was more important than family." Grace sighed, and for a moment she looked like she was about to brush off his apology. But instead, she met his gaze. "It wasn't just about you not being there, Ethan. It was that you never looked back. You left, and you didn't see what I was going through. I lost more than just our parents. I lost you too." Her words cut deep, and Ethan felt a surge of regret so intense it made his throat tighten. All his success, all his accomplishments, felt meaningless in the face of what he had lost. Seeing Ethan's remorse, Grace took a deep breath, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Look, maybe we could take a walk? I need to get a few things from the market, and Mia loves visiting her friend nearby. You could join us, if you want." Ethan's heart leapt and he nodded, grateful for the opportunity. "I'd like that," he said. The three of them set off down the street, with Mia skipping ahead, waving to neighbors and pointing out every interesting thing she saw. As they walked, Ethan noticed how people greeted Grace with genuine warmth. She was part of a community here, connected to others in a way that he had never experienced in Willow Heights. They passed by small shops, cafes with old wooden signs, and kids playing in the streets. It reminded him of his own childhood, growing up in a neighborhood much like this, where everyone knew each other and the air was filled with laughter and life. At the market, Mia tugged Ethan toward a small stand selling fresh pastries. "Uncle Ethan, can we get a cinnamon roll? Mom says they're the best." Grace smiled, shaking her head in mock disapproval. "Oh, you're going to get him hooked on sweets now, are you?" Ethan chuckled, taking a few bills out of his pocket and handing them to the vendor. He bought 3 cinnamon rolls, savoring the sweet, warm scent as they bit into the pastries. The simple act of sharing a treat together felt strangely profound. For the first time in years, Ethan felt connected to something real, something beyond wealth or ambition. As they continued walking, Grace spoke up, her voice softer now. "This place, these people, they were here for me when I lost everything," she said. "When Mia's father passed, I thought I wouldn't make it. But they stepped in, watched Mia when I was working, brought us meals when I was too exhausted to cook. I wouldn't have made it without them." Ethan listened, the ache in his chest growing. He'd been so focused on building his own success that he hadn't even noticed the challenges his own sister had faced. The sacrifices she'd made, the strength she'd shown, all of it had gone unappreciated while he'd been wrapped up in his own world. "Grace," he began, his voice thick with emotion, I had no idea. I wish I had been there for you. I wish I could go back and change things." Grace looked at him, her expression a mixture of sadness and understanding. "You can't change the past, Ethan, but maybe you can be here now." They made their way back to Grace's home in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. When they reached her door, Grace turned to Ethan, her face soft but serious. "You know, Mia's thrilled that you're here. She's always wanted to meet you. I don't know what you're looking for, Ethan, but I want you to know that she's had a good life here." Ethan nodded. understanding her need to protect her daughter. "I don't want to disrupt that. I just want a chance to get to know both of you again. I want to be here, in whatever way I can." For the first time he saw a hint of something in Grace's eyes, a sliver of hope, tempered by caution. She nodded slowly. "Well, let's take it one day at a time." Mia, unaware of the tension between the adults, ran up and wrapped her arms around Ethan. "Will you come back, Uncle Ethan?" Ethan crouched down, looking into her hopeful eyes. "Of course, Mia," he said softly. "I'll come back as often as you'll have me." Mia grinned, her happiness infectious, and Ethan felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. As he turned to leave, he glanced back, his heart full of a new determination. This wasn't just a fleeting visit. It was the beginning of something he was ready to commit to, a chance to reconnect with the family he'd lost. As he walked away, Ethan's thoughts buzzed with plans for future visits, ideas for how he could help Grace, and a fierce desire to repair the bond he had once taken for granted. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of purpose beyond the walls of his company. He knew it would be a difficult journey, filled with challenges and painful reminders of his past mistakes, but he was willing to face them. And as he glanced back one last time, catching sight of Mia waving enthusiastically, Ethan felt a stirring of something he hadn't known he was missing, a sense of home. Ethan woke early the next day, his mind buzzing with thoughts of his niece and the encounter with Grace. He lay in his expansive bed, staring up at the ceiling, feeling a mixture of anticipation and nerves he hadn't experienced in years. His usual morning routine felt strangely unappealing. Checking emails, reviewing business plans, none of it had the pull it once did. Instead, he found himself reaching for his phone and pulling up Grace's number. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the call button. He didn't want to push too hard or disrupt her life, but he wanted to follow through on his promise to Mia. Finally, he dialed, his heart pounding as the phone rang. Grace answered after a couple of rings, her voice cautious. "Ethan? Hey, Grace," he said, trying to keep his tone light. I was just thinking about yesterday. I'd like to see you and Mia again, if that's okay. Maybe we could all get breakfast this time?" "My treat." There was a pause, and Ethan could almost feel Grace weighing the offer. "Mia would love that," she replied, a hint of warmth in her voice. "There's a little cafe we go to sometimes. Nothing fancy, but it's nice. Meet us there at 8? "Perfect," Ethan replied, smiling despite his nerves. "I'll be there." The cafe was a quaint little spot on the corner, the kind of place Ethan rarely frequented. It had a rustic charm, with mismatched chairs, local art on the walls, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. As he entered, he spotted Grace and Mia sitting by a window, Mia waving eagerly as soon as she saw him. "Uncle Ethan!" she called, her voice carrying across the cafe. A few patrons looked up, smiling at her enthusiasm. Ethan felt a warmth fill him as he made his way over, Mia's joy contagious. Grace offered a polite nod, and he noticed she looked more relaxed than the day before. It seemed that Mia's excitement was helping bridge the gap between them. They ordered pancakes and coffee, and Ethan found himself savoring the simple meal, each bite richer because of the company. As they ate, Mia filled the silence with stories about school, her favorite TV shows, and the adventures she planned to have with her Uncle Ethan. Ethan listened, nodding along, but he kept sneaking glances at Grace, who seemed to be observing him carefully. There was an unspoken tension between them, remnants of unresolved hurt and anger. But beneath it, he saw a flicker of hope, as if Grace was beginning to believe he truly wanted to reconnect. After they finished eating, Mia insisted on showing him her favorite spots around the neighborhood. Grace agreed, surprising him with her willingness to spend more time together. As they walked, Ethan marveled at how this little girl, with her boundless energy and curiosity, had the power to bridge the years of distance and silence between him and Grace. Later, they returned to Grace's house, Mia running ahead to show off her garden, mostly a small patch of wildflowers and herbs that she and her mother tended together. Ethan and Grace followed at a slower pace, the quiet between them filled with the weight of all the years they'd spent apart. As they stood by the garden gate watching Mia happily inspecting her plants, Ethan took a deep breath. "Grace, I know I haven't been there for you," he began, his voice low, I thought maybe I was helping by building a successful business, by giving us a name, a legacy. But now I see how much I missed out on." Grace didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on Mia. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but tinged with sadness. "Ethan, I don't think you realize what it was like for me. After Mom and Dad passed, I didn't just lose them. I lost you too. You were the only family I had left, but you were gone." Her words stung, each one a painful reminder of his absence. Ethan had been so focused on his work, on climbing higher, that he hadn't seen the sacrifices others were making, or the struggles they faced without him. "I wish I could change things," he said quietly. "If I could go back—" "You can't," she replied, cutting him off. But her expression softened. "But you're here now, and Mia, she's already so attached to you." They fell silent, watching as Mia gathered a handful of wildflowers and held them up proudly. "Look, Mom! Look, Uncle Ethan! Aren't they pretty?" Ethan smiled, nodding. "They're beautiful, Mia." Grace's gaze softened as she looked at her daughter. "Maybe," she murmured, almost to herself, "maybe it's not too late." Over the next few weeks, Ethan made an effort to spend more time with Grace and Mia. He joined them for casual dinners, helped Mia with her school projects, and even took them out to a movie, something he hadn't done in years. Slowly, he became part of their routine, each visit a small but significant step toward bridging the gap between them. But despite the progress, Ethan sensed that Grace still held back, as if she was waiting for him to prove his commitment, not just to Mia but to her as well. One evening, as they were sitting on the porch after dinner, Ethan decided to address the tension head-on. "Grace," he began, his voice hesitant, "I know I've hurt you, and I know it's going to take more than a few visits to make up for all those years. But I want you to know I'm here to stay. I want to be part of your life, both of your lives." Grace looked at him, her expression guarded but hopeful. "You say that now, Ethan, but what happens when work calls? When you have to go back to your life?" Ethan hesitated, realizing the truth in her words. His life was demanding, a constant juggle of responsibilities and expectations. But standing here with Grace and Mia, he felt a determination that he hadn't felt in years. "I'll make it work," he promised, his voice steady. "You and Mia, you're my family. I'll find a way to be there for you." For the first time, Grace's guard seemed to drop. She reached out, placing her hand over his. "We'll see," she said softly. But there was a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a glimmer of trust beginning to form. One weekend, Grace mentioned that the local community center where she volunteered was hosting a fundraiser to raise money for after-school programs. She looked at Ethan cautiously, as if unsure whether to ask for his help. But before she could say anything, he offered. "I'd love to help," he said, surprising both himself and her. "Let me know what I can do." Grace nodded, a hint of gratitude in her expression. "We're mostly looking for donations, but any help would be appreciated." Ethan could see the importance of this center to Grace. She mentioned how, when Mia was younger, they'd relied on the community's support for childcare and other resources, especially during difficult times. On the day of the fundraiser, Ethan arrived early, helping set up tables, decorate, and organize supplies. As people filtered in, he saw Grace in her element, greeting neighbors and coordinating volunteers. He watched her with admiration, realizing how selflessly she gave of herself for others. This was a side of Grace he hadn't seen before, a side he wished he had been there to support all along. Mia stayed by his side, introducing him to people with pride. "This is my Uncle Ethan," she said to anyone who would listen, her face lighting up with each introduction. It struck him how easily Mia accepted him, how she looked past his absence and saw only the family she wanted. The fundraiser was a success, and by the end of the day, Ethan was exhausted but exhilarated. He and Grace exchanged a tired but satisfied smile, and for the first time, he felt like he was part of her world. After the fundraiser, Ethan and Grace walked back to her home, Mia skipping ahead. They talked about the event, the money raised, and the joy of seeing the community come together. But as they neared her house, Ethan felt a weight settle over him, an unspoken question lingering between them. "Grace," he began, stopping on the sidewalk, "why didn't you ever reach out? After everything happened?" I would have come if you'd told me how hard things were. Grace looked at him, a hint of bitterness in her eyes. Would you have, Ethan? You were halfway around the world. I tried a few times, but you were busy. And after a while I realized I had to move on. I couldn't keep waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. Ethan felt the sting of her words, a painful reminder of his choices. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick. I should have been there. I thought I was doing the right thing by making something of myself. But I see now. I lost sight of what really mattered. Grace sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. I don't want an apology, Ethan. I just want to know that you're here for real. That you're not going to disappear when things get tough. He nodded, a sense of resolve filling him. I won't disappear again, Grace. I promise. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but there was an understanding between them now. A shared recognition of the pain and the hope that came with rebuilding. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Grace found themselves settling into a routine. They shared family dinners, movie nights, and even a weekend picnic in the park. Mia's boundless energy and joy made each moment brighter, her innocent acceptance a balm for the years of hurt. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Grace took a deep breath. Ethan, there's something I wanted to ask you. Mia's birthday is coming up and, well, she keeps talking about you. It would mean a lot to her if you were there. Ethan's heart swelled. I'd be honored, Grace. Whatever you need. Help with the planning, the food, anything? I'm here. A faint smile touched her lips. Thank you, Ethan. I think it'll mean the world to her. As they sat in the cozy warmth of Grace's living room, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the first time in years, he had more than just a high-rise office and a cold mansion to return to. He had a family, a connection, and a chance at redemption. Ethan arrived at Grace's house early Saturday morning, as Mia had requested. Today was their day, as she called it, and she had been eagerly anticipating it since he'd promised to take her to the art museum and then out for ice cream. She was waiting by the front door when he pulled up, her face lighting up with excitement as soon as she saw him. Uncle Ethan, she called, bounding down the porch steps. Ethan barely had time to brace himself before she hugged him, her enthusiasm brightening his entire morning. Are you ready for our adventure? He asked, smiling as he took her hand. More than ready, she replied, her eyes wide with excitement. Mom said I could spend the whole day with you. Grace appeared in the doorway, smiling softly at the two of them. You two have fun, she said, giving Mia a quick kiss on the forehead. Then she looked at Ethan, her expression a mix of gratitude and caution. Thank you for doing this, Ethan. It means a lot to her. He nodded, feeling the weight of her trust. It means a lot to me, too, he replied sincerely. The art museum was a grand building with high ceilings and endless halls filled with paintings, sculptures, and artifacts from around the world. As they walked through the galleries, Mia's face was a picture of wonder and curiosity. She darted from one exhibit to the next, her questions coming at Ethan faster than he could answer them. Uncle Ethan, how do they make the statues so smooth? She asked, touching the air just inches from a marble sculpture of a classical figure. Ethan smiled, kneeling down beside her. Well, artists use tools to chip away the stone very carefully, little by little. It takes a lot of patience. Mia nodded, her brow furrowing in concentration. Mom says I have to work on my patience, she whispered as if sharing a secret. But I think I'd like to make something like this one day. Ethan was struck by her passion, her genuine interest in art. He remembered his own childhood dreams, how he'd wanted to be an inventor, building things that would make the world better. Somewhere along the line, he'd lost that creative spark in his relentless pursuit of success. But here, watching Mia, he felt something stir inside him. Maybe he hadn't lost it entirely. Maybe he could rediscover it through her. They spent hours wandering through the exhibits. Mia was captivated by a display of landscapes, particularly a painting of a seaside village, its colors vivid and full of life. She stared at it in awe, as if she could step into the scene itself. "Isn't it beautiful?" she whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "It is," Ethan replied, marveling not just at the painting but at Mia's reaction to it. He was learning to see things through her eyes, discovering beauty and joy in the simple act of observing. By the time they left the museum, He felt as though he'd experienced a part of life he hadn't allowed himself to see in years. And judging by Mia's chatter as they walked toward the ice cream parlor, she'd had a day she would remember for a long time. They arrived at a small, retro-style ice cream parlor with booths lined in bright red vinyl and a jukebox in the corner. Mia's eyes lit up as she looked at the dozens of flavors behind the glass, her fingers tapping her chin in deliberation. "What are you going to get, Uncle Ethan?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Maybe chocolate mint," he said thoughtfully. "What about you?" "I think I'll get strawberry with rainbow sprinkles," she declared, as if making a very important decision. They placed their orders, and Ethan led her to a booth by the window where she eagerly dug into her ice cream. "Thank you, Uncle Ethan," Mia said between bites, her expression softening. "I've never been to the museum before. It was amazing." Ethan's heart clenched as he realized how many simple experiences she'd missed out on. He wanted to say something, to promise her that he'd make sure she had more days like this, but he didn't want to overstep his bounds with Grace. So instead, he just smiled and nodded. "I'm glad you had fun, Mia. We'll have to go on more adventures together." Mia beamed, clearly thrilled by the idea. "Mom and I have lots of fun too," she said, her expression turning thoughtful. "But she works a lot. She has to take care of everything, you know." Ethan listened intently, struck by the maturity in Mia's words. "Your mom is very strong, Mia," he said. "She's done so much for you." Mia nodded, her gaze turning serious. "She misses Grandma and Grandpa too. She doesn't say it, but I know she does." Ethan felt a pang of guilt, realizing just how much Grace had gone through alone. Mia's simple words carried a depth of understanding that both impressed and saddened him. She shouldn't have had to be so mature at such a young age. "Your mom's been through a lot," he said gently, "but she's lucky to have you. You're a wonderful daughter, Mia." She smiled, but there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "Sometimes I think she's lonely," she whispered. "That's why I'm glad you're here, Uncle Ethan. Maybe we can all be happy together." The innocence in her words moved him deeply. He wanted to tell her that he'd stay, that he'd be a permanent part of her life. But he knew it would take time to earn that place in Grace's heart and to prove himself. All he could do was be there, day by day, step by step. The following week, Ethan joined Grace at the community center again, this time to help with organizing supplies and setting up the children's art program. Mia was ecstatic when she saw him walk through the doors, and she immediately pulled him toward the art room, where kids were busy painting, drawing, and crafting. "I help the little kids here sometimes," Mia explained proudly. "I show them how to make things with colors and glitter. Do you want to see?" Ethan nodded, genuinely interested. He watched as she moved among the younger children, showing them how to use brushes and helping them choose colors. She had a natural kindness and patience with the kids, who clearly adored her. As he helped Mia pass out supplies, he couldn't help but notice the state of the center itself. The walls were peeling, the tables and chairs were worn down, and the lighting was dim. The place felt tired, neglected, but it was clear it held a special place in the community's heart. He approached Grace during a break, nodding toward the art room. "The kids really love it here," he said, keeping his tone casual. "But the place could use a bit of an upgrade. Have you thought about fundraising for repairs?" Grace shrugged, looking around with a hint of sadness in her eyes. "We've tried, but it's difficult to raise the money we need. And even when we do, there's always another expense. The center's been around for years. It's one of the few places families can gather." Ethan felt a surge of purpose. He'd spent years building his wealth, focusing only on himself. But now he saw an opportunity to use his resources for something meaningful. "Let me help," he said, his tone firm. "We could organize a fundraiser, reach out to businesses, get people involved." Grace looked at him, surprised. "Ethan, I appreciate the offer, but this isn't a charity project. These people, my friends, they wouldn't want to feel like they're a pity case." Ethan shook his head, a gentle smile on his face. "I don't see it like that. This place deserves to shine because of the love and hard work everyone puts into it. It's a part of your community, a part of Mia's life. And if I can help in any way, I want to." After a long pause, Grace nodded, a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. "All right, Ethan. Let's see what we can do." As they began planning the fundraiser, Mia's birthday approached. She was thrilled at the idea of having her uncle at her party, and Grace allowed Ethan to help with the preparations. He took it upon himself to make the day special, determined to give Mia the kind of birthday he felt she deserved. The day of the party, he arrived early with balloons, a cake, and a special gift he'd picked out. A small but beautiful set of art supplies. The look on Mia's face when she unwrapped it was worth every penny. "Thank you, Uncle Ethan," she squealed, hugging him tightly. "This is the best present ever." Seeing her joy, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. It was a simple gesture, a small effort compared to what he'd accomplished in the business world, but it felt infinitely more meaningful. He realized that these moments, the smiles, the laughter, the connections, were worth more than any financial success he'd achieved. Grace watched from across the room, her expression softened with appreciation. Ethan could see that she was beginning to trust him, to believe that he truly wanted to be there for them. And that trust, fragile and tentative as it was, meant everything to him. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the house had quieted down, Ethan sat with Grace on the back porch. Mia had fallen asleep, exhausted from the excitement of her birthday, and the two of them shared a peaceful moment under the stars. "I just want you to know," Ethan began, breaking the silence, "that I don't take any of this for granted. Being here with you and Mia, it's more than I deserve, but I'm here to stay. I mean that." Grace looked at him, her gaze softened by the evening light. "I believe you, Ethan," she said quietly. "And I think Mia does too. She's already grown so attached to you." Ethan felt his heart swell with gratitude. "Thank you, Grace. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right from here on out." They sat in comfortable silence, the unspoken understanding between them growing stronger. For the first time, Ethan felt truly connected, not just to his family but to something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. Over the next several weeks, Ethan continued to spend time with Grace and Mia, often visiting them for dinners, picking Mia up from school, and lending a hand at the community center whenever he could. Each interaction, each small moment shared, brought him closer to them, weaving him into the fabric of their lives. For the first time, he felt connected to something that didn't revolve around profit margins or investor calls. Instead, he felt driven by a desire to support the people he cared about. One afternoon, Ethan stopped by Grace's house after picking up some groceries for her, a habit he'd formed once he noticed how carefully she budgeted each purchase. He was becoming more attuned to the subtle ways she balanced everything, making sacrifices he had never thought about. Ensuring Mia's needs always came first. He entered the kitchen where Grace was preparing dinner. She glanced over at him, her expression grateful but also slightly guarded. He knew she wasn't used to relying on anyone, least of all him. "You didn't have to do that, Ethan," she said as she placed the vegetables he'd brought on the counter. "We're managing." "I know," he replied gently, taking a seat at the small kitchen table. "But I want to help however I can. I know I've missed a lot, and I can't go back, but I want to be here now." Grace looked at him for a moment, her expression softened by the sincerity in his eyes. "I appreciate it," she said quietly. "It's just, Mia and I have always had to depend on each other. She's grown up knowing that it's just us, so it's hard to accept help, even if it's coming from family." Ethan nodded, understanding her hesitation. He admired Grace's resilience, her fierce determination to provide for Mia without asking for anything in return. But he couldn't ignore the weariness he saw in her eyes, the subtle lines etched from years of worry and self-sacrifice. After a quiet pause, he spoke. "Grace, I know you've been doing this on your own for a long time, and I don't want to overstep, but maybe I could help with more than just groceries. I want to be a steady presence for Mia, and for you too." Grace hesitated, clearly taken aback. She seemed to be considering his words, weighing the offer with a mixture of hope and caution. "You mean, you want to help us regularly?" "Yes," he replied, leaning forward earnestly. "I want to be here for both of you, in every way I can. I've spent years focusing on myself, and now I want to focus on family." Grace's eyes softened, but there was a hint of skepticism as well. "I don't want Mia to get used to something that won't last. She's already so attached to you, Ethan. If you're serious about this, You have to be all in. Ethan nodded, understanding the commitment he was making. He wanted to reassure her, to make her see that he was in this for the long haul. I am all in, Grace. Whatever you need, just let me know. Grace took a deep breath, her gaze dropping to her hands. After a moment, she looked up, a mixture of vulnerability and determination in her expression. Well, there is something that's been weighing on me. It's about the community center. I've been struggling to keep some of the programs running, and honestly, I'm not sure how much longer we can keep the doors open. Ethan's brows knitted together in concern. I thought the fundraiser went well. Are the funds not enough? Grace shook her head. They helped, but there are a lot of expenses. Repairs, equipment, basic upkeep. We're barely scraping by, and I'm afraid if we don't find consistent support, we'll have to cut some programs. Ethan felt a surge of determination. Let me help. I could contribute financially, yes, but I'd also like to get involved. There are people I can reach out to, colleagues and friends who'd be interested in supporting a place like this. Grace looked at him, surprised. You'd be willing to reach out to your business contacts for this? Of course, he replied without hesitation. This community center is important, not just to you and Mia, but to everyone in the neighborhood. I want to be a part of that. Her expression softened, gratitude mingling with relief. If you're sure, then I think we could make a real difference together. The following weekend, Ethan and Grace sat down together at the community center, armed with notebooks, laptops, and lists of tasks. They worked side by side, brainstorming ideas, creating budgets, and drafting letters to potential donors. Grace was methodical, her experience with community work evident in her attention to detail. Ethan admired her dedication, how she understood the needs of the families that relied on the center. As they worked, they began talking more about the center's history. Grace explained how it had once thrived, a bustling hub for art classes, sports, tutoring, and social gatherings. But over time, funding dwindled, and programs were cut. The center was a lifeline for me when Mia was little, Grace admitted, her voice soft. There were days when I didn't know if I could keep going, but knowing there were people here to support us made all the difference. I want other families to have that too. Ethan listened, his respect for her growing. He realized that Grace's strength went beyond her ability to handle challenges. It was in her compassion, her desire to give back to the people who had once supported her. They spent hours discussing how they could revitalize the center, even sketching out plans to introduce new programs. Grace suggested free workshops for parents, while Ethan proposed adding a computer lab to offer tech classes for both kids and adults. Mia joined them at one point, offering her own ideas with an enthusiasm that reminded Ethan of how much potential lay within this place. He could see the spark in Mia's eyes, the excitement she felt about the possibility of helping her friends and neighbors. And he realized that this wasn't just about him or Grace. It was about building something that would benefit future generations. As they worked, Ethan began reaching out to his contacts, arranging meetings with people who could potentially donate to or sponsor programs at the center. He was surprised by the positive responses he received. Colleagues who had never shown interest in his business ventures were suddenly eager to help, touched by his commitment to his family and community. A few weeks later, they held a meeting with the community members, presenting the plans and asking for input. The turnout was impressive, with parents, children, and even seniors showing up to learn about the proposed renovations and programs. Ethan watched as Grace spoke with confidence, explaining the vision she and Ethan had crafted. When it was his turn to speak, Ethan took a deep breath, hoping his words would resonate. I know I'm new to this community, he began, meeting the eyes of the people gathered. But I've seen the incredible impact this center has on everyone here. I want to do my part to ensure it thrives, and I'm committed to working alongside each of you to make this a reality. After the presentation, parents came up to thank them, sharing stories of how the center had helped them during tough times. One father spoke of how the tutoring program had helped his daughter raise her grades, and a mother tearfully recounted how the center's daycare had allowed her to work and support her family. Seeing the genuine gratitude in their faces, Ethan felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known was possible. This was more than just a project. It was a chance to make a lasting difference. That evening, after everyone had left, Ethan and Grace stayed behind to clean up. The center was quiet now, the echoes of laughter and conversation lingering in the air. They moved in comfortable silence, sharing a sense of accomplishment that filled the space between them. Grace finally spoke, her voice soft. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with all of this, Ethan. You've surprised me." He paused, looking at her earnestly. "I meant what I said. I want to be here for you, for Mia, for this community. This project, it's given me a purpose I didn't know I needed." Grace nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I can see that, and I appreciate it, more than you know." They stood there, the weight of their past slowly giving way to a new foundation built on trust and mutual respect. For the first time, Ethan felt that he belonged, not just as a visitor, but as a part of Grace's world. He was no longer an outsider looking in. He was woven into the fabric of her life and the lives of those she cared about. The next day, Ethan met Mia after school, taking her out for hot chocolate at a cozy cafe nearby. She was bubbling with excitement, eager to tell him about her day. He listened with a smile, cherishing the simple joy of these moments. As they sat together, he told her about the community center plans, explaining how they would be adding new programs and improving the space. Mia's eyes sparkled with excitement as she listened, her pride in her mother and uncle evident. "Wow, Uncle Ethan, does this mean we'll have even more fun things to do at the center?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Yes," he replied, smiling warmly. "And it's all thanks to your mom. She's the heart of this place." Mia beamed, nodding eagerly. "Mom is amazing. But you're pretty amazing too, Uncle Ethan. I'm glad you're helping us." Her words touched him deeply, and he felt a renewed determination to continue supporting Grace and Mia in any way he could. This wasn't just a project or an obligation. It was a commitment he wanted to honor for the rest of his life. As they walked home, Mia held his hand, her small fingers wrapped around his with a sense of trust that moved him profoundly. They passed the familiar streets of Grace's neighborhood. The cozy houses and tree-lined sidewalks bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. Ethan felt a deep sense of peace, a satisfaction he had never experienced before. This was what life was meant to be, filled with purpose, connection, and the love of family. When they reached the house, Grace was waiting at the door, her face softening as she saw them approach. She thanked him quietly for spending time with Mia, her expression conveying a gratitude that went beyond words. As he left that evening, Ethan felt a powerful sense of clarity. He wasn't simply filling a role or making amends for past mistakes. He was building a life filled with meaning, a future defined not by wealth or status, but by love, resilience, and family. Over the next month, Ethan's involvement in the community center became more than just a weekend activity. He was there almost every day, helping with repairs, organizing programs, and talking to the families who relied on the center for support. He met parents who worked long hours to provide for their children, seniors who enjoyed the companionship of community gatherings, and kids who found a safe place to study and play within the center's walls. Each story he heard, every face he saw, deepened his resolve. Ethan had spent years in boardrooms, making deals and signing contracts, yet none of it had left him with the same satisfaction he felt here. He wasn't simply helping to fund the center. He was investing in people's lives, learning their struggles, and sharing in their joys. He even joined Grace in organizing weekly meetings with the staff and volunteers, brainstorming ways to maximize resources and reach more families. Julia, the community center's director, was initially skeptical of his commitment, but over time she began to see his dedication and grew to appreciate his efforts. Julia was a hard-working, compassionate woman in her early 50s, and her experience with community work was evident in her calm, focused demeanor. Her years of service to the community had given her a sharp insight into people's needs and an unshakable determination to keep the center going, no matter the challenges. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of repairing broken chairs and sorting donations, Julia pulled Ethan aside. "I'll admit, I didn't expect you to stick around this long," she said, a warm smile softening her usually serious expression. "But you've proven me wrong, and it's good to be proven wrong sometimes." Ethan laughed, humbled by her words. "I'm here for the long haul, Julia. This place has become important to me. It's changed me." Julia nodded, her smile widening. "Then let's keep changing lives together." One of the community center's most popular programs was its after-school tutoring service, where volunteers helped children with their homework and reading skills. Grace often brought Mia to the sessions, and as a new volunteer, Ethan found himself seated among the kids, guiding them through math problems and reading exercises. It was a surprisingly rewarding experience. One day, a young boy named Daniel approached him with a notebook and a hesitant smile. Daniel was about 8 years old, with unruly dark hair and a curious gaze. "Mr. Ethan, can you help me with my reading?" "Of course, Daniel," Ethan replied, pulling up a chair beside him. They spent the next half hour working through a story about astronauts and planets, Daniel sounding out each word with growing confidence. Afterward, Daniel looked up at him, his eyes wide with pride. "Thank you, Mr. Ethan. I've never read a whole story by myself before." Ethan felt a lump in his throat, moved by the boy's accomplishment. "You did a great job, Daniel," he said, ruffling his hair. "You're going to be a fantastic reader." As he watched Daniel run off to tell his friends, Ethan realized that he was gaining far more from these moments than he could ever give. Helping these kids, encouraging them, seeing their joy and pride, it filled a space within him that he hadn't known was empty. Over time, Ethan and Julia developed a rhythm, working side by side to organize events, manage donations, and tackle the many issues that arose each day. They often stayed late, making phone calls and drafting plans to keep the center running smoothly. Their shared mission created an unspoken bond, a sense of mutual respect and understanding. One evening, as they were packing up after a particularly hectic day, Julia looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, Ethan, I've seen a lot of people come through these doors. Some stay, some leave, and others, well, they come for a while but drift away. But you're different." Ethan shrugged, feeling a bit shy under her steady gaze. I feel like I belong here, like I'm finally doing something that matters." Julia nodded, her expression softening. "That's what community work does. It grounds you, and it's good to have people like you who bring fresh ideas and energy." As they locked up, she surprised him by inviting him to join her and a few of the volunteers for coffee at a nearby cafe. It was the first time she'd extended such an invitation, and he felt a deep sense of acceptance. They spent the evening sharing stories about their lives, their favorite memories, and the unexpected joys they found in their work. Julia's laughter and warmth drew him in, and he found himself enjoying the simple pleasure of good company. For the first time in years, he felt a genuine connection with someone who saw beyond his wealth and status. This new friendship with Julia was a gentle reminder of the kind of life he wanted to build. A life grounded in compassion, purpose, and companionship. Back at Grace's house, Ethan's bond with Mia continued to grow. They played board games, watched movies, and spent hours talking about everything from her school friends to her dreams of becoming an artist. Mia's laughter filled the house, her innocent joy lifting Ethan's spirits and bringing warmth to Grace's small living room. One evening, they decided to have a family game night, with Grace, Ethan, and Mia competing in a lively game of charades. Mia was animated, acting out each word with exaggerated gestures, and her laughter was contagious. Grace joined in, her usually reserved demeanor softening as she joked and teased. Ethan watched them, a feeling of gratitude swelling in his chest. This was what he had missed all those years, these moments of laughter and connection, the simple joy of family. He had been so consumed by his ambitions that he had neglected the people who mattered most. But now, he was here, part of this family, sharing in their happiness and love. As the evening wore on, they found themselves talking about old family memories, reminiscing about their childhoods, and sharing stories of their parents. Grace shared memories of family camping trips and holidays, painting a vivid picture of the closeness they had once shared. Ethan listened, feeling a pang of nostalgia and regret. He had lost so much time, but he was determined not to lose any more. He promised himself that he would be there for Grace and Mia, that he would do everything in his power to keep these precious moments alive. As their fundraiser plans took shape, Ethan faced a new challenge: securing sponsorships and partnerships to sustain the community center's future. With Grace and Julia's help, he organized meetings with local businesses, pitching the vision for the center and explaining the impact it had on the community. One of the meetings took place at a local bank, where Ethan spoke passionately about the center's programs and the need for ongoing support. Grace and Julia were with him, their presence giving him confidence as he made his case. The bank manager, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, listened intently, her expression thoughtful. After the meeting, as they walked out of the bank, Julia turned to Ethan, a glint of admiration in her eyes. "I have to say, Ethan, you have a way with people. That was impressive." Ethan laughed, feeling a surge of pride. "Well, it helps to have something worth fighting for." Grace smiled, a hint of pride in her expression as well. "It's good to see you putting your skills to work for something that makes a real difference." Their encouragement meant more to him than he could express. He realized that he wasn't just working to save the community center. He was fighting for the people he cared about, for the family and community that had welcomed him back into their lives. As the fundraiser approached, excitement filled the air at the community center. Volunteers painted walls, repaired broken furniture, and decorated the space with handmade banners and posters. The children pitched in, eager to see their beloved center transformed. Mia helped Ethan set up tables and chairs, her enthusiasm contagious. She chatted excitedly about the new programs they were planning, her dreams of learning more about art, and her ideas for helping her friends with their homework. "Mom says you're doing so much for us, Uncle Ethan," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You're really making a difference." Ethan looked at her, his heart swelling with love. "I'm just happy to be here, Mia. You and your mom have given me more than I could ever give back." Mia hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around him with a warmth that melted his heart. In that moment, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. His life had purpose again, a purpose rooted in love and connection. The fundraiser was a lively event, with families, volunteers, and community members filling the center, their faces alight with excitement and hope. Ethan felt a deep sense of pride as he looked around, seeing the impact of their work and the sense of unity it had fostered. There was a small stage set up for speeches, and Ethan had volunteered to speak. As he stood before the crowd, he felt a moment of nervousness, but Julia gave him an encouraging nod, her smile steadying him. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "This community center has become more than just a place to me. It's a home, a place where people come together, where families find support, and where children can dream big. I've spent years chasing success, but I've learned that true wealth is found in the connections we make, in the lives we touch." He paused, his gaze moving to Grace and Mia, who were watching him with pride. "I'm grateful to each of you for welcoming me into this community, for allowing me to be a part of something greater than myself, and I promise to continue supporting this center, to keep fighting for a brighter future for all of us." The crowd erupted in applause, their support and appreciation filling the room. Ethan looked out at the faces before him, feeling a deep sense of belonging and joy. This was his community now, his family, and he was determined to be there for them, no matter what. After the event, as the center began to empty and the volunteers cleaned up, Ethan and Grace found a quiet corner to sit and talk. Grace looked at him, her eyes shining with pride and warmth. "You did a wonderful job, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I never imagined you'd become such an important part of this community." He took her hand, his expression serious. "Grace, I couldn't have done any of this without you. You've shown me what it means to care, to be there for others. You and Mia, you're my family, and I want you to know that I'm here to stay." A tear slipped down Grace's cheek and she smiled, squeezing his hand. "We're lucky to have you, Ethan. You've given us so much more than you realize." They sat in silence, their bond deepening with each passing moment. Ethan knew that he had finally found his place in the world, not in wealth or status, but in the love and support of the people around him. He had come full circle, discovering a life of purpose, family, and true belonging. It had become a cherished tradition for Ethan to join Grace and Mia for Sunday dinners. These evenings were simple, home-cooked meals, laughter, and stories shared around the table. For Ethan, they were a reminder of the closeness he had lost but was beginning to regain. Tonight's dinner was no different, with Mia animatedly recounting a story about her friend's school project. "I told Sam that my uncle is going to teach us how to use computers at the center," she announced proudly, her eyes shining with admiration for Ethan. "And he said he wishes you were his uncle too," Grace chuckled, reaching over to ruffle Mia's hair. "Well, Uncle Ethan is pretty special," she said with a soft smile, glancing at him. Her tone held genuine warmth, but also a hint of something else, an unspoken acknowledgement of all they had been through to get to this moment. Ethan felt a rush of gratitude as he looked at his family. Mia's laughter and Grace's smile filled the room with warmth. But underneath his contentment, he sensed an underlying tension, a heaviness that had yet to be addressed. As much as they'd bonded in recent months, he knew there were unresolved issues between him and Grace, old wounds that had been glossed over but never truly healed. After dinner, while Mia was upstairs finishing her homework, Ethan and Grace lingered in the living room. The air between them was quiet but charged, as if they both knew a deeper conversation was waiting to happen. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything he wanted to say pressing against him. He turned to Grace, his voice tentative. "Grace, there's something I've been meaning to talk about. I know I wasn't there for you after Mom and Dad passed, and I know I left you to carry a burden that wasn't fair." Grace's expression softened, but her eyes held a sadness he couldn't ignore. She looked away, gathering her thoughts. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost as if she were afraid of unearthing the past. "Ethan, I don't think you really understand what it was like for me," she began, her gaze fixed on a spot on the floor. "You left, and suddenly I was alone. I had just lost our parents, and it felt like I'd lost you too. You were out building your career, your life, and I was just trying to survive. For Mia, for myself." Her words were filled with a pain he had never fully grasped, a loneliness that cut deep. Ethan felt his throat tighten, guilt washing over him in waves. He had always believed he was working toward a better life, that his success would somehow make up for his absence. But now, he realized how misguided that thinking had been. I thought if I succeeded, if I made a name for myself, that I could make things better for us," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I see now that I missed everything that really mattered. I missed you. I missed Mia's childhood. I missed being a part of your lives." Grace's eyes filled with tears, and she took a shaky breath. "It wasn't just that you left, Ethan. It was that you never looked back. I kept waiting for you to reach out, to show that you cared. But the years went by, and eventually, I had to accept that you weren't coming back." Her voice broke, and she wiped at her eyes, a mixture of anger and sorrow evident on her face. Ethan felt a surge of regret so intense it made his chest ache. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but he knew that words alone couldn't heal the pain he had caused. "I'm so sorry, Grace," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "If I could go back, I would do everything differently. I would have been there for you. For Mia." Grace looked at him, her expression softened by his remorse. "I know you're sorry, Ethan, and I know you're trying to make things right now. But it's hard. There were so many nights when I felt like I was drowning, like I didn't have anyone to lean on. And knowing you were out there, living your life, it just made the loneliness harder to bear." They sat in silence, the weight of her words settling over them like a thick fog. For the first time, Ethan saw his sister's life through her eyes, the sacrifices she had made, the strength she had summoned, the resilience that had carried her through when he was absent. He reached out, his hand covering hers. "Grace, I can't change the past, but I promise you, I'm here now. I'll do whatever it takes to make it up to you and Mia. I want to be part of your lives, to be the brother and uncle I should have been all along." Grace looked at their hands, her gaze softened. "I appreciate that, Ethan, and I believe you. But rebuilding this, it's going to take time." Ethan nodded, understanding the enormity of what he was asking for. "I'm not going anywhere, Grace. I'm here for the long haul." They sat in quiet understanding, the tension between them beginning to dissolve. It was a step, a small one, but a step nonetheless, toward healing. They had acknowledged the pain, laid bare the regrets, and for the first time opened the door to true forgiveness. A few days later, Ethan had a chance to speak with Mia while they were at the community center. They were cleaning up after an art workshop, and Mia was chattering about her day, her joy infectious. "Uncle Ethan, did you know Mom is really happy now?" she said suddenly, her voice filled with innocent excitement. Ethan looked at her, surprised by the insight. "Oh? And how do you know that, Mia?" Mia shrugged, her gaze serious. "I just know. Before she was always tired, always worried. But now? Now when you're around? She laughs more. She smiles more. I think she feels safe." Ethan felt a lump in his throat, moved by Mia's words. "Mia, I'm so glad I can be here for both of you. Your mom is amazing. She's one of the strongest people I know." Mia nodded solemnly. "She really is, and I'm glad you're here too. I was always a little sad that I didn't know my uncle. But now I feel like I have my whole family." Ethan pulled her into a hug, his heart full of gratitude for this little girl who had accepted him so wholeheartedly. "I'm here to stay, Mia. You and your mom are my family, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you both feel loved." One quiet afternoon, Grace approached Ethan with a request he hadn't anticipated. She asked if he would join her on a visit to their parents' graves. It had been years since he'd gone, and the thought filled him with a mixture of guilt and longing. But he knew it was a step he needed to take, not only for himself, but for Grace. They drove in silence to the cemetery, the air between them heavy with unspoken emotions. When they arrived, Grace led the way to their parents' headstones, her movements slow and reverent. She placed a bouquet of flowers on the graves, her hands lingering as she knelt beside them. Ethan stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the names carved into the stone. Memories flooded him. Memories of laughter, family dinners, the way their mother used to fuss over them, the way their father always seemed to have a piece of wisdom to share. He realized just how much he missed them, how much he regretted not being there when they had needed him most. "I feel like I failed them," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I wasn't there when they passed. I wasn't there for you, and I hate that I let them down." Grace looked up at him, her expression softened by empathy. "They loved you, Ethan, and they would want you to find happiness, to make a difference. That's what they always taught us, to care for others, to look after family." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch comforting. "And I think, if they were here, they'd be proud of you. You've come a long way. You're here now, making things right. And that's what matters." Ethan nodded, her words a balm to his wounded heart. They stood in silence for a while, honoring their parents' memory and finding solace in each other's presence. This visit was a healing step, a way to acknowledge the past while moving forward with a renewed sense of purpose. As they left the cemetery, Grace turned to him, her expression filled with a new sense of understanding. "Thank you, Ethan, for coming here with me, for being here for Mia and me. I know we still have a long way to go, but I'm glad we're on this journey together." Ethan looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Grace, I'm here for you, always, whatever it takes." In that moment, he felt a profound sense of peace, a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. He realized that this journey, the one toward forgiveness, family, and belonging, was one he wanted to be on for the rest of his life. And for the first time, he felt he was truly honoring his parents' legacy, carrying forward their values and love through his actions. When they returned to Grace's home that evening, they found Mia waiting for them on the porch, her face lighting up as she ran to greet them. She hugged them both, her warmth and innocence wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. That night, as they sat together in the living room, Ethan felt a renewed sense of commitment. He had faced the past, confronted his regrets, and taken steps to make things right. And he knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would continue to walk this path, surrounded by the love and support of his family. He looked at Grace, then at Mia, his heart swelling with gratitude. This was his family, his home, and he was finally ready to give them the best of himself. In the weeks following his heartfelt conversation with Grace, Ethan's sense of purpose grew stronger. Each visit to the community center felt like a step closer to building something meaningful, something lasting. He began to view the center not just as a volunteer project, but as a vital part of the family and community he was helping to rebuild. One morning, as he was working in the community center's office with Julia, he found himself absorbed in a list of upcoming expenses. The center needed more resources than he'd initially realized: computers for the kids' homework program, new equipment for the sports teams, and even basic maintenance to keep the center's facilities up and running. Julia leaned over his shoulder, her expression thoughtful. "It's a lot, isn't it?" she asked, giving him a sympathetic smile. "We stretch every dollar as much as we can, but sometimes it feels like we're always just getting by." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. He had become deeply invested in the center's future, and he realized that piecemeal donations wouldn't be enough to make the impact he envisioned. The community needed more than just temporary support. They needed security, a foundation that would sustain the center for generations to come. A thought struck him, an idea that felt both daunting and inspiring. He glanced at Julia, excitement flickering in his eyes. "What if we went bigger? What if we could create a fund, something long-term, that would provide stable support to the center?" Julia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Like an endowment fund?" "Exactly," he said, his mind already working through the logistics. "I could use my contacts and resources to start it, and if we could get other local businesses involved, we could create something lasting, something that would keep this center going for years, no matter what." Julia's face lit up, her admiration clear. "Ethan, that would be incredible. It would give the center stability, a way to keep helping families without constantly worrying about funding." He smiled, feeling a surge of determination. This was more than just a donation. It was a commitment to the future, a way to honor the community that had given him so much and to ensure its legacy. Later that evening, Ethan shared his idea with Grace and Mia over dinner. He explained the concept of the endowment fund, how it would create a financial safety net for the center, allowing it to expand its programs and serve more families. As he spoke, he noticed Grace watching him with a mixture of surprise and pride. "Ethan, it's incredible," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I never expected you to go this far. It's like you're really becoming part of this place, part of our lives." Mia looked up at him with wide, admiring eyes. "Uncle Ethan, does this mean the community center will be here forever?" Ethan smiled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "That's the goal, Mia. I want to make sure the center is here for you, for your friends, and for everyone who needs it." Grace's gaze softened as she looked at him, her expression filled with warmth. "You're making a difference, Ethan. Not just for us, but for so many people. I think Mom and Dad would be proud of what you're doing." Her words touched him deeply, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about the center. It was about building a future, creating a legacy of compassion and service. It was the family's way of giving back, of honoring their parents' values, and it was a future Ethan was proud to help shape. In the weeks that followed, Ethan threw himself into setting up the endowment fund, reaching out to former colleagues and business contacts, and organizing meetings with local businesses to secure additional support. His passion was contagious, and he found that many people were inspired by his dedication. Some of his contacts, intrigued by his transformation and moved by his commitment, agreed to contribute, while others offered their services pro bono to help launch the fund. With Julia and Grace's help, they organized a launch event for the endowment fund, a celebration of the center's achievements and a vision for its future. It was held at the center itself, the rooms filled with families, volunteers, and supporters who had come together to honor the community they had built. The night of the launch, Ethan stood at the podium, glancing out at the crowd. He saw Grace and Mia in the front row, their smiles filling him with confidence. He took a deep breath, allowing the emotion of the moment to ground him before he spoke. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and humility. "This community center has become more than a place to me. It's become a home, a place where I found my family, my purpose, and a sense of belonging. And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. This center is a lifeline, a place of hope, and it deserves to have a future as bright as the dreams of everyone it serves." He paused, glancing at Julia and then at Grace, whose pride shone in her eyes. This endowment fund isn't just about finances. It's about creating a legacy, a foundation that will keep this community strong for years to come. It's our way of giving back, of ensuring that future generations will have a place where they can learn, grow, and find support. The audience erupted into applause, their enthusiasm and support filling the room with warmth. As Ethan stepped off the stage, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that he was leaving a legacy far more meaningful than any business achievement. After the event, as the crowd mingled and celebrated, Julia pulled Ethan aside, her expression filled with admiration. "I have to say, Ethan, I'm amazed. What you've done here? It's incredible. I didn't think I'd ever see this place so full of hope." He smiled, his gratitude evident. "It's not just me, Julia. It's you. It's Grace. It's everyone who's been part of this community. I'm just glad I could help." Julia gave him a warm smile, her eyes softening. "Still, you've brought something special to this place. And to be honest, you've brought something special to my life too. I never thought I'd find someone who cares so deeply about the things I care about." They stood there, the hum of voices and laughter around them, a shared understanding passing between them. For Ethan, his connection with Julia had become a meaningful part of his new life. Their shared passion for the community and their growing friendship gave him a sense of companionship he hadn't realized he needed. Before she turned to rejoin the crowd, she touched his arm gently. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." He nodded, a warmth spreading through him. "Thank you, Julia, for believing in me." The following weekend, Grace surprised Ethan with an idea she had been considering for a while. A weekend trip for the three of them to the cabin where they had spent family vacations as children. It was nestled in the countryside, a place filled with memories of laughter, games, and family bonding. "I thought it would be a nice way to take a break, to celebrate everything we've accomplished," Grace said with a shy smile. "And Mia's never been there. I thought it would be special for her." Ethan agreed enthusiastically, and the three of them set off early Saturday morning, driving through winding roads and scenic landscapes. When they arrived, Mia's eyes widened with excitement, taking in the rustic charm of the cabin surrounded by towering trees and a sparkling lake. "Is this where you and Mom used to come as kids?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Ethan nodded, smiling as memories flooded back. "Yes, Mia. We spent a lot of summers here, playing in the lake, hiking in the woods, and having family bonfires. It was our special place." They spent the weekend exploring, hiking through the forest, fishing by the lake, and roasting marshmallows under the stars. Mia listened eagerly to Ethan and Grace's stories, laughing as they recounted childhood antics and the unforgettable moments they had shared. On the last night, they gathered around a small fire pit outside the cabin, the flames casting a warm glow on their faces. Ethan felt a profound sense of peace as he looked at his family, grateful for the journey that had brought him here. Grace turned to him, her expression softened by emotion. "Ethan, I just want you to know, I'm proud of you. You've become someone I can rely on, someone Mia can look up to. Thank you for being here, for choosing us." Ethan swallowed, her words filling him with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known he needed. "Thank you, Grace, for giving me a second chance, for letting me be part of your lives. I'm here to stay. This is where I belong." They sat together in comfortable silence, the night filled with the sounds of crackling fire and the soft whispers of the trees. For Ethan, it was a perfect moment, a memory he would cherish forever, a symbol of the family he had found and the future he was building with them. After the weekend, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. His bond with Grace and Mia had deepened, and his commitment to the community was stronger than ever. He knew, however, that one piece was still missing: his own home. His mansion in Willow Heights felt like a relic of a past life, a symbol of isolation that no longer represented who he was. One evening, after dinner at Grace's house, he broached the topic with her. "I've been thinking about selling my place in Willow Heights," he said, his tone thoughtful. "It doesn't feel like home anymore. I want to find something smaller, closer to you and the center." Grace looked at him, her face lighting up with surprise. "Are you sure? That's a big change." Ethan nodded, a sense of clarity settling over him. Yes, I don't need all that space. What I need is family, community, a place where I feel connected. That's here, with you and Mia. Grace's eyes filled with gratitude, and she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. We'd love that, Ethan. Your family, and having you nearby would mean everything to us. With Grace and Mia's support, Ethan sold his mansion and found a cozy house near the community center, a place that felt like home from the moment he stepped inside. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was filled with warmth and potential, a space where he could create new memories with the people he loved. As he settled into his new life, Ethan found that his days were filled with purpose and joy. He spent his mornings volunteering at the center, his afternoons visiting Grace and Mia, and his evenings reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. One evening, as they gathered for dinner in his new home, Ethan looked around the table, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had come full circle, rediscovering the true meaning of family, love, and community. He was no longer the man who had once been consumed by ambition and success. He was a man who had found his place in the world, a place filled with love, laughter, and a future he was proud to build. And as he looked at Grace, Mia, and Julia, he knew that his journey had only just begun. Together, they were creating a legacy of compassion, a future filled with possibility, and a home where love and family would always come first. As the months passed, Ethan settled into his new role as a central figure in both his family and the community. He worked tirelessly with Julia, organizing everything from weekend programs for children to health and wellness workshops for families. The community center was flourishing, with new families joining every week, each bringing their unique stories and energy. Ethan felt himself growing alongside them, discovering strengths he hadn't realized he possessed. One Saturday morning, the community center hosted a family field day at a nearby park. Ethan and Julia had spent weeks planning the event, gathering donations from local businesses and recruiting volunteers. The park was filled with laughter, children playing games, and parents connecting over shared experiences. Ethan walked through the crowds, greeting familiar faces and lending a hand wherever needed. Mia was leading a group of kids in a relay race, her face alight with joy. Watching her, Ethan felt a surge of pride. She was growing into a confident, compassionate young girl, and he was grateful to be a part of her life. As the event wound down, Julia joined him, a satisfied smile on her face. "Look at this," she said, gesturing to the families gathered in the park. "You've helped make all of this possible, Ethan. You've created a place where people feel like they belong." He looked at her, a sense of fulfillment filling his heart. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Julia. You've taught me what it means to care, to give back. I'm just following your lead." She smiled, her eyes reflecting a warmth he had come to cherish. "Well, you're doing a wonderful job, and I think we make a pretty good team." They stood side by side, watching as the families packed up to head home, their laughter and joy lingering in the air. For Ethan, it was a perfect moment, a reminder that he had finally found his place in the world, a place filled with purpose and belonging. In the days following the event, Ethan and Julia continued to grow closer, their friendship evolving into something deeper. They spent long hours together at the community center, sharing ideas and laughter, their connection strengthening with each passing day. Ethan found himself looking forward to their conversations, appreciating Julia's insight, humor, and unwavering dedication to the community. One evening, after a particularly busy day, Julia invited him to join her for a quiet dinner at a local cafe. The atmosphere was warm and intimate, with soft lighting and the hum of quiet conversation around them. Over a simple meal, they spoke about their dreams, their challenges, and the journey that had brought them to this moment. As they laughed over shared memories, Julia looked at him, her gaze thoughtful. "Ethan, I don't think you realize how much you've changed since you first came here. You're a completely different person now, someone who's not just part of this community but truly invested in it." Ethan felt a wave of gratitude, his heart swelling with affection for her. "Julia, you've been a big part of that change. You showed me what it means to care for others, to find joy in giving back. I don't know what I would have done without you." She smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "You would have figured it out. But I'm glad I got to be part of it." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Ethan realized that his connection with Julia was no longer just friendship. It was something deeper, something that had grown quietly between them, built on shared values and a mutual respect that had only deepened over time. Meanwhile, Ethan's relationship with Grace and Mia continued to flourish. They had become more than family. They were his closest friends, his source of joy and laughter, and his greatest inspiration. He spent every weekend with them, often joining Mia in her art projects, or going on long walks with Grace as they talked about everything from the past to their hopes for the future. One sunny afternoon, Ethan took Grace and Mia on a day trip to a nearby art museum, a place Mia had been eager to visit again since their first trip together. As they wandered through the galleries, Mia peppered Ethan with questions about each painting, her curiosity and enthusiasm filling him with pride. At one point, Grace took him aside, a warm smile on her face. "You know, Ethan, Mia talks about you constantly. You're her hero. I can't thank you enough for being such a wonderful role model for her." Ethan looked at her, his heart full of gratitude. "Thank you, Grace, for giving me a second chance. I feel like I've found a part of myself that I'd lost, and it's because of you and Mia." They shared a quiet, understanding look, a bond of trust and love that had been hard-won but was now unbreakable. For Ethan, this was more than he could have ever asked for. A family, a purpose, and a future filled with possibilities. One evening, as Ethan was locking up the community center, he received an unexpected call from a former business associate, John, someone he hadn't spoken to since he left his previous life behind. John was in town for a few days and wanted to meet up, saying he'd heard about Ethan's new work in the community and was curious to see it for himself. They arranged to meet for lunch the following day at a cafe near the community center. When Ethan arrived, he found John waiting, his expression one of both curiosity and respect. They caught up on each other's lives, discussing the changes they'd both experienced in recent years. "I have to admit, Ethan," John said, his tone thoughtful, "I was surprised to hear that you'd left everything behind to work in a community center. That's a big change from the world we used to live in." Ethan nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "It is, but it's the best decision I've ever made. I found something here that I couldn't find in boardrooms or office buildings, a sense of purpose, a family, and a community that I'm proud to be a part of." John looked at him, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. "You know, it takes a lot of courage to make a change like that, and honestly, it's inspiring. I think a lot of us could learn from what you're doing here." As they parted ways, Ethan felt a renewed sense of validation. His former life seemed distant, like a chapter he had closed with no regrets. He had found his true calling, and he was content with the path he had chosen. Despite his satisfaction, Ethan occasionally struggled with moments of doubt, questioning whether he was truly worthy of the love and trust he had earned. One evening, after a long day at the center, he found himself alone, reflecting on his journey. He thought about all the time he had lost, the years he had spent focused solely on his career, and the people he had hurt along the way. As he sat in his quiet living room, the silence felt heavy, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he still had more to prove. He had made amends with Grace, become a father figure to Mia, and earned the respect of Julia and the community. But sometimes he wondered if it was enough. In that moment, he remembered something his father had once told him, a lesson he hadn't fully understood until now. Success isn't about what you achieve, Ethan. It's about the impact you have on others, the kindness you show, and the love you leave behind. The memory brought him a sense of peace, a reminder that he was on the right path. His journey wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a future filled with compassion, generosity, and love. And as he reflected on the life he was creating, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to continue this work, to keep growing, and to leave a legacy that truly mattered. As the end of the year approached, the community center organized a holiday celebration, a gathering to bring everyone together and celebrate the achievements of the past year. The center was decorated with twinkling lights, festive garlands, and a Christmas tree adorned with handmade ornaments from the kids' art class. Ethan, Grace, Julia, and Mia worked together to make the event special planning activities for families, setting up tables of food, and organizing games and performances for the children. The turnout was incredible, with families filling the center, their laughter and joy creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere. As he looked around, Ethan felt a sense of pride and contentment. This was what he had always wanted: to be surrounded by people he cared about, to be part of something that made a difference. Grace joined him, her face alight with happiness, and they watched as Mia performed a short dance with a group of her friends, her excitement infectious. "You've built something beautiful here, Ethan," Grace said, her voice filled with admiration. "I can't tell you how grateful I am to have you in our lives." Ethan looked at her, his heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you, Grace. You've given me more than I could ever repay. This community, this family, it's everything to me." She smiled, her hand resting on his arm. "Then keep building it. Keep making it better. You have so much to give, and you're right where you're meant to be." As the celebration continued, Ethan took a quiet moment to reflect on the year. He had come so far, transforming from a man driven by ambition and success to someone who found joy in service, love, and family. The community center was thriving, and his relationships with Grace, Mia, and Julia were stronger than ever. Ethan knew that his journey was far from over, that there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and struggle. But he was no longer alone. He had found a home, a family, and a purpose that went beyond anything he could have imagined. As he joined his family and friends in the celebration, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. He had finally discovered what true success meant, not in wealth or recognition, but in the lives he touched, the love he shared, and the legacy of compassion and kindness he was building each day. With his heart full of gratitude, he looked forward to the future, ready to embrace every moment, every challenge, and every joy that life would bring. The new year began with a crisp, clear winter, and Ethan continued to enjoy the rhythm of his new life. One Saturday, he picked up Mia for an afternoon at the community center. They were planning an art exhibit, displaying the children's artwork from the past year as a way to celebrate their creativity and give them a sense of pride. Mia was thrilled at the idea, chatting non-stop about her drawings and the paintings her friends would be showing. As they worked together to set up the display, Ethan was struck by Mia's growth. She was more confident, her natural compassion and leadership skills shining as she helped the younger kids arrange their artwork. He could see how much she had blossomed over the past year, how the community center and her family had given her a foundation of love and support. At one point, as they were arranging a set of paintings, Mia turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Uncle Ethan, do you think I could help people one day too?" He crouched down beside her, meeting her gaze with a gentle smile. "Absolutely, Mia. You already do. Every time you share your kindness, every time you help a friend, you're making a difference. And if you ever want to work here at the community center or help in any other way, I'll be here to support you." She beamed, a look of pride lighting up her face. "I think I want to be like you and Mom when I grow up, helping people, making them feel safe and happy." Ethan's heart swelled with emotion, her words a reminder of the legacy he hoped to leave behind. Mia's future was filled with possibilities, and he felt grateful to be part of her journey, to see her embrace values that would guide her throughout her life. After the art exhibit, Ethan stayed late to help Julia clean up. The children's artwork had been a huge success, and the families who attended had praised the center's commitment to fostering creativity. Julia seemed especially pleased, her smile brighter than usual as they worked side by side, stacking chairs and tidying up the space. As they finished, Julia paused, glancing at him with a thoughtful expression. "Ethan, have you thought about what's next? I know you've done so much here already, but I feel like there's more you want to do." Ethan nodded, his mind already filled with ideas. "I've actually been considering expanding the programs here, adding mentorship and skills training, maybe even scholarship opportunities for the kids. I want to make sure they have every chance to succeed." Julia's face lit up, her excitement mirroring his own. "That would be incredible. We've already seen how much the community has grown because of your work. But that kind of commitment, it's more than most people would take on." Ethan met her gaze, a warmth spreading through him. "It's worth it. This community is worth it." And so are you, Julia. Working with you has changed my life in ways I can't even put into words." Julia's expression softened, and she took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything you've done, and for being someone we can all count on. You've given me hope, for the center, for the future." They stood together, their bond deeper than ever, strengthened by a shared vision for the future. Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, knowing he had found a partner not only in service, but in life. Together, they were creating a future that would continue to uplift and inspire the community for years to come. As spring approached, Ethan decided it was time to take the next step in his commitment to Grace, Mia, and Julia. He gathered them at his home one evening, inviting them to join him for a special dinner. Grace and Mia arrived first, and soon after, Julia joined, filling the room with warmth and laughter. After dinner, Ethan took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He looked around at the people who had become his family, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I wanted to bring you all here tonight because, well, you mean everything to me," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "This past year has been the most meaningful of my life. I've found my purpose, my home, and my family, and I want to make sure I'm here for each of you for as long as you'll have me." He turned to Julia, his gaze steady. "Julia, I'm so grateful for you, for your kindness, your strength, and your commitment to this community. You've inspired me to be a better man, and I want to walk this path together with you." Julia's eyes filled with tears, her smile soft as she reached for his hand. "Ethan, I can't imagine a future without you. We've built something beautiful together, and I want to keep building it with you." Grace and Mia exchanged a look of joy and excitement, their expressions filled with happiness as they embraced Ethan and Julia. They spent the rest of the evening talking about their dreams for the future, their hopes for the community, and the love that had brought them together. For Ethan, it was a perfect moment, a celebration of the family he had found and the life he was building with them. He had come so far, from a man consumed by ambition to someone who found fulfillment in service, love, and connection. And now, he was ready to commit fully to the life he had chosen, surrounded by the people he loved. Inspired by his family and community, Ethan took steps to formalize his vision for the future. He established the Collins Legacy Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting the community center and funding educational and social programs for underprivileged families. It was a way to ensure that the values he had embraced would continue to make a difference, long after he was gone. With Julia and Grace by his side, Ethan reached out to local businesses, community leaders, and former colleagues, building a network of supporters who shared his vision. The foundation's mission was simple, yet powerful: to create opportunities for those who needed them most, to provide resources for education and growth, and to foster a sense of belonging for everyone in the community. The foundation launched with a grand opening ceremony, attended by families, volunteers, and supporters from all walks of life. Julia and Grace both spoke, sharing stories of the center's impact and the importance of community support. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he was leaving a legacy rooted in compassion and love. "This foundation isn't just about financial support," he began, his voice steady and heartfelt. "It's about creating a future where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, where families can find support, and where children can grow up knowing they are valued. Together, we're building a community where love, kindness, and service are at the heart of everything we do." The applause that followed filled the room with hope and excitement, a testament to the lives they were already touching. Ethan looked around, feeling the depth of his impact, and knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Months after the foundation was launched, the community center completed its first major expansion, adding new classrooms, a library, and a mentorship space for teens. To celebrate, Ethan, Grace, Julia, and Mia took a private tour of the newly renovated center. The rooms were filled with potential, each one a symbol of the center's growth and the future it was creating for the families it served. As they walked through the library, Mia ran ahead, her eyes wide with excitement. She turned to Ethan, her voice filled with awe. "Uncle Ethan, it's beautiful. Can I come here to study? Maybe even help with the little kids? Ethan smiled, his heart full as he watched her explore. Of course, Mia. This is your space too. You can come here anytime, and you're welcome to help in any way you want. Grace placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression filled with pride. You've created something truly special, Ethan. I think Mom and Dad would be so proud of the man you've become. He nodded, her words filling him with gratitude. I hope so, Grace. This is all for them, for you, for Mia. I want this center to be a place where people find hope, where families come together. Julia joined them, her gaze warm. And that's exactly what you've done. You've given this community a place to call home, a place where they feel valued and supported. They stood together, the weight of their shared journey settling over them. For Ethan, it was the culmination of everything he had worked for, a testament to the love and compassion that had guided him to this moment. That evening, as the sun set over the town, Ethan sat with Julia, Grace, and Mia on his front porch. The air was filled with the soft sounds of crickets and the distant hum of voices from neighbors enjoying the warm summer night. They sat in comfortable silence, each of them reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. Mia leaned against Ethan, her voice soft. Uncle Ethan, thank you for everything. I'm so glad you're here with us. He wrapped an arm around her, his heart full of love. I'm glad too, Mia. You and your mom have given me a life I never knew I needed. Julia reached for his hand, her smile gentle. And you've given us all a family, a future. We're lucky to have you, Ethan. As they sat together watching the stars appear one by one in the sky, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. He had found his place in the world, surrounded by love, purpose, and a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. His life, once defined by ambition and success, was now filled with moments of connection, acts of kindness, and the joy of giving back. He knew that the future was bright, not just for him but for the community, for Grace and Mia, and for everyone whose lives he touched. As the night deepened, they remained on the porch, sharing stories, laughter, and memories. For Ethan, this was his happy ending, a life filled with purpose, love, and a legacy that would continue to grow, carried forward by the people he loved. And in that quiet, starlit moment, he knew that he had truly found home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join us for more stories filled with hope, redemption, and the beauty of family and community. Your support helps us bring more meaningful content right to your screen. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.